Dan, okay. On an average, when you looked at each one of our employees, what was our average total annual productive hours?
I could look it up for you. I could pull the model up.
It's not off the top of your head.
No. But, you know, I didn't see, actually, I think it was higher than that.
You think it was higher than that?
Yeah, I didn't, if it's, you know, if it's in the, you know, below 1,400, 1,300 hour range, I would probably bring that up. If it's within a normal range, that typically stay, I don't make a real big deal about it.
Okay.
If it's high, I'm working with one community right now where it's like over 1,600, and I'm kind of scratching my head saying, why? And actually, when we look at it, one of the reasons is because everybody that works for the town has been there for like a week. And they're hiring people right out of college.
And so the work breaks are the 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon, doesn't take in consideration the lunch break?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Again, then, though, this is a hypothetical calculation.
Totally hypothetical.
It's based on what benefits that the town provides on average to its employees, not whether they actually use them or not, take vacation, take sick, etc. They could theoretically over that year take those hours.
The assumption with vacation is people take it.
Right.
Whether they do or not is a different issue. If they don't take it and they can't accumulate it, I say it's a gift to the town.
Okay. Okay. And then the other allocated materials and supplies on your hypothetical, that seems like a lot of money.
It makes the numbers balance out real easy.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Typically, you know, materials and supplies is, you know, give or take 5% of labor.
Okay, per person,
Per person.
5% of
And
your salary?
And it could be lower than that, and it could be higher than that.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
let's go.
Department overhead would be, there's often a question about, well, what's the difference between department versus town? Department overhead would be, I'm not sure there's a good example, but Lisa functions as essentially the director of community development. Planning, I'm sorry. Mike, you're the director of community development. So Mike actually provides an overhead function for that department. So, you know, when we're looking at you know, community development folks, we're factoring in his cost as a overhead factor that's not involved with the town overhead. Any questions?
Okay.
Okay. All right, let me go on to what we did for contract staff, because you're not paying contract staff quite like you are town staff. So here's what we had to do. This is again a totally hypothetical example. If you're paying one of your contract staff $125 an hour, we still need, or you still need, to recover the cost of materials and supplies. You still need to recover any department overhead as well as town overhead. So we did all of these three on a basically a percentage basis. So, you know, we know what incoming town overhead cost is to that department. So we looked at the total labor cost of both contract as well as town staff, just worked out the percentage, and then we added it all up. Conceptually, it's pretty simple, and actually doing it was a little bit more complicated. Any question about that? Okay. All right. User fee study. Again, what we're really looking for is a driver, what I call a driver-based costing model. And I may be the only person in the room here that actually gets excited about driver-based costing models. I actually wrote a book on the subject of all crazy things. Why I did that, I have no idea. But what we're looking at here is, well, we have labor cost. How is labor cost pulled through the process inputs, which are all right here, to actually provide and process a lot line adjustment? So as we pull the labor costs through the system, and actually pulling labor costs through the system is actually the right word. We're looking to see what's driving that cost, what's pulling it out of the system. And it's things like department M&A, it's customer service, it's application intake, it's engineering plan review, it's inspection, project management, council presentation. And all these things are purely hypothetical. They may or may not look exactly like the activities that we identified in our planning model. Probably pretty close though. So as labor cost moves through the system, it's also pulling with it the services and supplies and all of the overhead that flows through here with it. Any question about that? Because it actually is pretty important. The indirect cost allocation plan really uses a very similar kind of model. We're looking at the drivers of cost. These are all the drivers of cost, and these activities are pulling labor out of the system towards a final partial amount. Okay. All right. We also have a quality assurance model, and again, I may be the only guy that gets excited about this kind of thing, but I happen to think that quality processes tend to produce quality outcomes. So we focus on quality processes. In my worldview, a quality process is spending as much time with guys like Mike and Lisa and Brett as I possibly can, sitting around a table much like what you're sitting around, with a computer and a projector. So we're looking at time estimates, we're looking at how costs are flowing through the system. The other way of doing that is I walk in and I give everybody an Excel spreadsheet and say, how much time do you spend on each one of these various activities? And I say, call me when you're done. And they call me 3 months after they said they'd have it done. And we go through it, and I find out typically that they just assigned a third of their time on the low end, or on the high end, I realize they just decided to assign 300% of their time. And so it becomes a very strenuous, iterative process of coming towards the middle, which is frankly a pain for everybody. So our quality process means we spend a lot of time here on staff, sitting over across in the street in the conference room. Again, computer hooked up to a projector, and going through the data, item by item. We also, I'm a great believer in internal staff review. Since we started this project, there's been probably chief building officials that probably span 75 to 80 years worth of experience in the building, construction, plan review, inspection business. So I happen to think that number of years is pretty important. I value that input. We ask for it routinely. We ask for a lot of staff reviews. Brett and Mike are probably sick of looking at the numbers I give them. But their input, their review is vital to this kind of a study. Another part of our quality process is that in the model I actually create I project out current revenue. So in my model, my projection of current revenue must match the actual revenue. So I'm building a model. I'm saying, okay, how much revenue should be coming in, and then I talk to Robert, and I say, Robert, how much money actually has come in, and it never matches. It would be shocking if it did, but if I'm within 5 or 10%, I'm happy. So those two numbers must match. The other thing must match is total hours assigned must match the total hours available. So I showed you in the earlier model where, if I'm looking at 1,500 hours for each staff person, hypothetically, well, I need to account for 1,500 hours for each staff person. And actually my model reminds me with red cells and things that flash, if I don't have exactly 1,500 hours assigned, and that's like 1,500, and I'm happy if it goes to 1,500 and then 0.001. But I have to totally assign 100% of the hours available, not 99% or not 101%. It has to be exactly 100%. So in my model, if there's 10,000 hours of total time available, I have to account for 10,000 hours of total time. Not if I'm accounting for 20,000 hours of total time, I've got to go back and look at the data and figure out what's going on. Finally, projected revenues have to equal expenses. So if I'm looking at $100,000 or $500,000 of revenue, I need to look at the budget and say, yep, that's what it costs. The state requirement is that fees, if you're charging user fees, they have to be aligned with cost. You can't charge more than cost. You can't charge one group of customers one rate at the expense of another one. If you're charging someone to do a plan review on a new home, you can charge up to cost, but not more than cost. Any question about our quality?
Yes. One of the problems I see here is that, you know, at the beginning of the year, we project so much business. Now that business may get more, may get less.
Yep.
And on the other side of the scale, we want total cost recovery for the cost of the building department. It just seems to me that there has to be some dynamic available changes during the year, so that if we get a lot less business, for instance, I mean, of course, we can lay off people or less hours, but that will not by itself do it. Or if we get a huge amount of business, then we would be bringing in excess revenues. Now, how do we handle that?
Okay, really good question. In fact, that's a very good question. There's a couple of responses to it. First of all, one of the things that we do look at is what's been the revenue stream out of the business activity in the last 2 or 3 years. And actually in the town of Atherton, it's been relatively constant. Now, that's not the case with a lot of California jurisdictions. It's been up and down, wild swings. But in this town, it's actually been relatively consistent. And we could debate, what relatively consistent looks like. From my perspective, in looking at, some of your neighboring communities where, in the last 5 years, development activity has just been hammered. Development activity in this town
Not here.
has actually remained fairly consistent.
It's
And that's
gotten
one
bigger.
response to your question.
Well, the other question,
Size-wise.
is it possible then to use reserves under those circumstances to take care of the swings?
Yes,
Yes.
I was actually going that was my next point.
Okay.
I do recommend, 3 to 6 months of operating expenses be held in reserves. And that is to do just exactly what you said, to
And-
smooth out those fluctuations.
And you're talking just in the building planning department area?
Well, the main application is building and planning, but I think you could apply that same thing to some degree with planning as well.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
you have a very good relationship with Interwest especially, Lisa as well, but Interwest especially, where it's a revenue sharing relationship. So if business goes down, you're really not penalized.
Right.
Yeah.
The problem we've had in the past is that our reserves have gone up too much. And we were kind of told that we had $1 million in reserve, we were told we had to reduce our fees because, I don't know if it was a legal requirement or not, maybe Bill Connors can tell us, but we were sort of banging against the maximum that was allowed.
Well, there's a couple of things about reserves that I think are often missed. One is that a reserve is, part of a reserve is really the funded liability of future work. So if today was June 30th and your fiscal year started on July 1, and I walked in with a $10 million project on June 30th, you would take my fees, but the work that would be done would probably take another 12 to 18 months to complete.
Yeah.
So,
Try 3 years.
excuse me?
Try 3 years.
Or maybe 3 years.
Well, we have a,
So a lot of times when I've been asked to look at reserves, in reality, they're not reserves at all. It's just it's a pile of, it sounds a little bit crass, it's kind of like a pile of money sitting there, but it's already been spoken for. Even though from an accounting standpoint, it may have all the appearance of a reserve. Now I believe, and Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we calculate you've got a little bit less than 6 months of reserves in the bank. Is that
For building.
for
For
building?
building.
Okay. Okay. Now, the other thing up to your question, sir, is that when we're looking at reserves, we're really looking at a budget versus income versus outgo, and what's left over. you'll see in this model that I built, we have other costs built into the building model as well as planning that aren't budgeted. And I'll get to those in just a minute. So when we're looking at full cost, oftentimes that's different than what the budget says. The other thing is, and this is true in this particular project, was when we looked at the budget didn't reflect town overhead costs, so there's some other factors in there. So when we look at reserves, now all of a sudden, you know, total reserves versus total cost, the ratio changes quite a bit. Any question?
Good.
Okay. Okay. All right, so here's the results. On the building side, and this, so we have the full cost here. Let me just sort of camp on building for the moment because that's the,
I just want to say,
Yes.
these are actual numbers.
yeah, these are real
These are our
numbers.
real numbers.
Yeah, these are real numbers. So the full cost for providing the building service, that's plan review and inspection, as well as the permitting process and all of that, and that includes technology, that includes a percentage or a component for maintaining the town's general plan, is $1.5 million. Current revenue from building is $1.3 million. You do the math, you come up with a little over $200,000. That's an additional cost recovery that's available if you were to choose to decide that full cost recovery for the building function is important to the town.
I have a
Yes, ma'am.
question. So, you said that in the building full cost, it is the additional reserves for technology enhancements and general plan.
Right.
That's new, because we have not ever added that into our building department costs.
Right.
And what percentage and what, formula did you use to add that in?
I'll show you that in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any other question? Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Same thing for planning. There's the full cost, there's the current revenue, and that's the difference. And again, this is, there's a couple of ways of looking at this. You could say, well, that's our additional potential revenue or potential additional revenue. The other way of saying the general fund is contributing $214,000 to the planning function. Another way of describing that is the citizens of the town of Atherton are contributing $214,000 a year to private development.
Yeah. Bad idea.
To private development?
Sure.
You mean
That's the
residential
subsidized
development?
component,
That's what?
subsidizing component. If you don't go to full cost recovery,
Yes,
that's what that shows.
right. But it's not all, I mean, it's not, are you trying to define it as commercial private development,
No.
spec development, business development? No, just personal residential, yeah. Because there are, residents, services that I think that we need to provide free of charge to our residents, like planning, over the counter, consultation and stuff that, not every time that a resident comes to the building or planning department, they have to. Send them a bill? Yeah, send them a bill, right? Here, write me a check, because you're gonna take some of my time to have me answer some questions about whether, what you wanna do with your property. I mean, that's something I think that is a service.
Yeah, counter hours and customer service over the counter, I think is built into the model
Right.
at
Yeah,
some point.
Yeah, we
Oh, that's
did,
not in this?
yeah, we did factor in counter time or customer
It's in there.
service.
It's
in
in
there.
there.
It's in there.
It's part of the cost.
Yeah.
Okay,
This,
yeah.
what this does, these are the specific costs allocated to individuals who are
Mhm.
using more specialized services,
Okay,
as opposed to people paying property taxes and their money goes to general, pay the general services.
okay.
We don't necessarily charge everybody that walks into the park.
So-
No.
So if someone comes in to get a building permit or a
Mhm.
planning application, and they actually fill it out, what's the cost of processing that? That's what this model addresses. The counter hours, customer service hours, those aren't a part of that.
But they may have come into the building department 2 or 3 times prior to that,
Correct.
trying to
Yeah,
figure
let-
out
let me-
whether or not
Let me be
they.
really clear about this.
Yeah.
We did in fact factor in the cost of customer service in each of these
Mhm.
fees.
Oh, okay,
It's all factored in now. Occasionally there are cities who will say no. Customer service, someone standing at the counter, that's a general, that's a of general value to the public, and we want the general fund to pay for that.
Yeah, that's
More-
what I want.
More often than not, they say, well, anybody in business has to provide some level of customer service. I'm a good example. I write proposals, and not every city accepts my proposals. So somehow, those cities that do accept my proposals have to pay a little bit of the cost for those cities that don't accept my proposals. That's just it's the cost of doing business. Again, I've seen a handful of cities who will say, no, the counter service is a general fund obligation, we want to fund it that way. Most cities I work with, they say, well, in reality, we still have to recover that cost. It's a cost to do business, and it needs to be recovered. That's strictly, in my judgment, that's a policy decision, and if you want to debate that, I'm more than happy to.
Oh, this just says we should raise the fees.
Yes. You have a question?
Based on your tracking, you're saying that in building alone, we're surplus 214,000?
No.
Subsidized.
Yeah.
Negative.
For sure.
All of them are negative.
But that includes customer service.
Right.
Okay.
How much customer service have you added into those?
I'd have to look at the model, but it's not like it's,
It's not $200,000.
oh no.
So it's about 10% down by the look of it.
Is it about?
Don't quote me on that, but that's probably fairly close
Okay,
of the total.
okay, all right.
Okay.
And that's, Lisa will spend some time at customer service, Brett will spend some time, maybe occasionally, Mike, maybe, a little bit of customer service. The counter tech, I forget her, Kelly, Kelly will spend some time providing customer service.
Yeah.
Again, the logic of including that it is a cost to the town, it's a cost of doing business, so we tend to include it. I could just as easily, if you decide, as a matter of policy or as a body decide not to include that, I can just as easily take it out.
Okay.
Any other questions? I appreciate your comments, Steve. Okay, going on. Okay, guiding principles, and this really applies to development services. Number one, adopted prices must be aligned with cost. This is a state requirement. Now, the state doesn't give any direction on how you arrive at cost. The state just says that cost must have a reasonable, based on a reasonable estimate of cost. It doesn't say cost to the 10 digits below the decimal point. It just says a reasonable estimate of cost.
But when you say adopted prices, you're really saying you could substitute the word fees.
Yes.
Because that's what the statute talks about.
Right.
Fees cannot exceed a reasonable expectation of cost. It's not an exact science, and that's why we resort to experts to tell us what those numbers are. Because they use different methodologies than maybe, Carol Flaherty's a good example. Her methodology is not the same one that we use for cost recovery. And that's why this says, where it says state requirement, there's a statute, it actually says, what you charge for fees cannot exceed the cost of providing that fee.
Right.
And that's what we're just doing for.
And the reason why I put prices in here sometimes, because a lot of us think, cost and price, and the cost of providing the service is not necessarily, in this case, there has to be a relationship between cost and price.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Private development should pay for itself. Now, another way of saying this is that the general public should not subsidize private development. Otherwise, if I live in this town and I'm putting up my 10,000 square foot dream home, there's no reason, if I could afford to put up my 10,000 square foot dream home, there's no reason why my neighbors should be helping me, move into that house at their expense. This is a policy, or at least a strong practice for many, or I would even say most municipal agencies, although I'm very quick to say how they define full cost is often up for grabs. There's all kinds of examples where they don't know what full cost is. There's all kinds of examples where people sometimes don't want to know what full cost is, or they redefine full cost to, for any number of reasons. But in general, most communities have a policy, or at least a strong practice, that development should pay for itself. Now, I have on occasion seen a couple of cities, I'll mention one, Hillsborough, California, beautiful community, very upscale. It's the home of a huge factory by, Intel has a huge factory there.
Not
No.
Hillsborough. Hillsborough's totally residential.
Hillsborough, Oregon.
Ah, you said Hillsborough, we said California.
Yeah, I know. I said, I'm sorry, Hillsborough, Oregon. They intentionally, if I was to show them this, the same, the council member would say, no, we don't do it that way. We intentionally keep development fees low because they want development. They're trying to do everything they can to attract development. I'm not really sure that keeping fees low is an attraction for development. I actually think it's a level of service that they provide is what attracts development. And the fact that they have this sort of love fest with the big computer chip company. Any question about that? Okay. All right. Now, this is, I do reserve some right. I think you pay me as a consultant to bring my best expertise and experience and judgment to a project like this. One of the things, there are two things actually, that I always ask when I'm, at some point when I'm working with staff, is one is, how are you paying for your technology? I routinely find building departments where their technology, their permitting system is 10 years old, it's way past the last leg, and there's no money in the budget to upgrade their system. Working with the town across the bay right now, there's supposed to be money in their budget for upgrading their technology, but as the budget cuts have been, they've had to be exercised, they've had to cut into that. Now they've got a system where their technology system, or they've got the case where the technology system is really now being a hindrance to the customers. Now, in February or March, I guess it was March, we met with, we call a stakeholders meeting. Brett, what do you call that, something lunch? The development roundtable. We had a great lunch at one of your park buildings. Several members of the development community came, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think the universal consensus was yes, keeping technology up to date is a huge advantage, a huge value to us. Because the faster they get their permits through the system, the faster they get their inspections made, the faster they can recoup their costs and make some money.
And that one, would that pay for your fees?
My fees?
No.
As a consultant? I didn't put my fees in here, but I have.
Is that the item that we would use to charge your fees?
Charge new fees?
No, your fee.
My fee.
Yeah.
So the fee that I calculated,
No, I mean,
No.
what we're paying.
Technology
or what you're paying me, that would not cover that.
So-
that cost.
Can we cover your fees from the building department?
Sure.
Okay, sure.
Or a portion of it.
Allocated,
Yeah.
yeah.
It has to be
It
allocated
has to be
across-
allocated.
Right.
So, you've got the general plan update, what about a housing element
It's
update?
included in
Oh,
that.
that's in the
Part
general
of the
plan, okay, so that's included in that, okay.
So since you mentioned the general plan, let me jump right down here if I may. And again, working with Lisa, we came up with an annual cost for the general plan, and then we assigned that cost, to the planning and building, I believe. And so that there would be hypothetically a surcharge that would then, cover the long-term expense of the general plan update. Now, I always tell this story, I may have told it when I was here before. I was working with a town out in the Central Valley a few years ago, and I was in a meeting much like this, and before I got up to give my presentation, again much like this, about 25 members of the Save Our Library group came up, and they all made their 3-minute speech about saving the library. I thought it was interesting. I didn't really realize what impact my work may have had on that discussion. But when I got up to give my presentation, one of the things I said was that we have included a cost the long-term cost of the general plan update. And the mayor looked at me and said, "You did what?" I said, "Well, why, we included the cost of the general plan update in with these fees." And he said, "Okay, thank you very much." I got done with my presentation, and the assistant city manager walked me to my car. This is 10 o'clock at night. He walks me to my car, and then, it's a farming community. I don't think it's too dangerous. But as he was walking me to my car, he said, "You have no idea what you just said in there, do you?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "The reason that the people were in there voting or encouraging us to save the library was because we hadn't maintained our general plan update for 20 years. The state has come in and fined us, and to pay the fine, and now to do the general plan update, we've had to close the library 2 or 3 days a week." So that's my standard story. I happen when I hear stories like that, and that's not the only one, that's just the best story. I always ask the question, how are you funding that? And to have this kind of a surcharge, and many cities do have this surcharge. Some cities will charge 100%, some charge will be 50%. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. But I think it provides a real good revenue stream to keep that plan updated. Any questions about these two surcharges? Okay. Now, one of my recommendations, and some people take it, some people don't, I think it's a cleaner model to do this as a surcharge. We could take this money and build it right into the user fees. The reason I like to recommend a surcharge is hypothetically, and Robert's going to correct me on I'm using the wrong term, hypothetically $44,000 goes into a bank account every year with technology surcharge on it, and nobody else can touch it. So that's the logic about it. All right, so let's look at some results. So what this graph shows, and this is for planning. So here's the total cost of the plan, and that includes, of the planning function, that includes an allocated portion for the two surcharges. Now here's the revenue stream. This is your current revenue stream. Here's the additional costs that are associated with planning fees. And then here's some costs up here. This would be like for doing planning work on behalf of the city itself, maybe a few other activities. This is really what you're looking at. And as you can see, your current cost recovery doesn't quite, or your current revenues don't quite cover your current direct costs, and certainly not any overhead. And as you can see, the biggest piece of what's not getting picked up is the town indirect cost coming in from your cost allocation plan. Okay. That's the biggest missing component, as well as the allocated costs for the two surcharges for planning. Any question about this? Okay.
This is just current fiscal year 13-14 or 12-13?
This would be based on 12-13, or the one we just finished today.
Okay.
However you say that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move to building then. A couple of general observations about what we did with building. One was that fees were restructured to better reflect the types of projects being completed in the town and the actual cost of plan review and inspection. You're going to hear me mention several times here about the actual cost of plan review and inspection, because that is what you can recover, and that is what needs to be recovered. And all of the fees and the systems that generate fees need to be focused on the cost to the town and nothing else. Second thing, fee calculations reflect the full cost of the town to provide plan review and inspection services. Again, it's kind of saying the same thing, but just a different way. But one of the things we're looking at in terms of our quality model, again, is to make sure that we're fully accounting for all costs, and that it's the town, in the building case, it's the cost to provide plan review and inspection services. Okay? Okay, here's some specifics. One is that we added several flat fees. Re-roofing is a good example. We added, I think, three re-roofing fees based on the size of the project. Not the value of the project, not the construction cost of the project, but the size of the project. I believe is based on square footage. We also took several of the projects that had been under the non-habitable project types were turned into flat fees, again, to better reflect the actual cost of plan review and inspection. These included pools, patios, and gazebos. And then finally, for the valuation-based fees, we calculated that those need to be bumped up by 10.4%, again, to fully reimburse the cost to provide that service. The result for many of these types of fees, the flat fees, the non-habitable construction projects that were turned into flat fees, most of that results in a lower price in most cases. I think the way we did re-roofing, I think that resulted in a lower price as well. And again, I'm making that distinction between cost and price. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So the non-habitable,
Yes.
there's other non-habitable
Yes.
spaces,
Yes.
like,
A basement.
mechanical room, right? Or an extra large garage, or, room that is unfinished, that we're currently, giving permits at what, $200 a square foot? So that has now been turned into a flat fee.
No.
No.
That is, what we did, we pulled some of those projects out, specifically pools, patios, and gazebos,
Uh-huh,
because those are not habitable.
right.
So we pulled
Unless
those
you're living in a
projects
pool.
out and set up flat fees, suggesting that one gazebo, in terms of the cost to the town
Uh-huh.
to provide plan review and inspection services, as well as the whole permitting process and the administrative paperwork, one gazebo is pretty much like another.
Okay, so have you listed out, with, planning and all the specifics, like pools, patios, gazebos? I mean, is there a list
Yes.
that goes on and
Broken
on?
out in the fee schedule.
Uh-huh.
That's-
Okay,
Swimming pools, patios, gazebos are listed out, re-roofing's listed out separate.
So it's a flat fee, it's not quality-based anything, it's just,
Flat fee to provide plan check and inspection.
Based on size of the roof that's being done, for a roofing permit, that's a flat fee, versus based on the valuation or the cost to do the job. things
We
like that.
we mistakenly used the word valuation before. And valuation really is an inappropriate adjective to explain what we're talking about. It's not the valuation of the project. It really has to do with what is now highlighted right there. It's the actual cost of providing the service